Let's go to the drama in our ports, where, as I mentioned earlier, Industrial Relations Minister Tony Burke has refused to intervene in the ongoing wage dispute between the ports operator, DP World, and the militant and powerful Maritime Union of Australia, the MUA. Industrial action is costing Australians $84 million per week while it's continuing. Of course, it's been happening since October. It's over $1 billion on that bill right now. And the impact's not only on goods coming into the country, it flows onto our growers and producers exporting their products to the rest of the world. For more on that impact, I'm joined by Emma Germano, President of the Victorian Farmers Federation. Emma, thank you for your time. I know, of course, you are a grower. You're from the land yourself. And given the finite shelf life of much of our agricultural and horticultural products, help us understand the impact of this port dispute on our farmers and ag industry more broadly.
So we know that when unions strike, Peter, that it has a disproportionate effect on the economy and on growers, particularly where the goods are perishable. You don't have a certain number of days before that product can actually become unviable. We're seeing things like shipping to Japan, which is ordinarily 16 days by sea, has blown out to 36 days, which makes that market completely unviable for us. Coming at a time where we know we've got to do some economic heavy lifting here, particularly out of Victoria. 1/3 of the exports are actually perishable agricultural goods. So it's going to have a huge impact on just the Victorian economy alone. And we've got these wharfies essentially holding the country and its ports to ransom.
Yeah, I might remind people, back in the GFC in 2007, 2008, the only reason we didn't slip into recession, and we were very, very close, you need 2 quarters of negative growth. Well, we had one, we didn't get the second one, only because agriculture held up the country. So that's how serious things are now. What was your reaction to the federal government today, Tony Burke in particular, the minister, saying, we're not going to wade in, they've got to sort it out, despite the fact this has been a blue since October?
They said that they weren't going to weigh in, but I think the minister made his sentiments very clear when he gave DP World a public whack over the knuckles to say that you're not going to step in, but to share that sentiment of disappointment essentially with the company, without mentioning that the wharfies striking is having this impact on every Australian. We've got to get real about this. It's not necessarily about the government just simply stepping in. If you say you're not going to step in, then don't step in. But there has to be something done around perishable goods. I personally think that you just shouldn't be allowed to strike where the goods are perishable. That actually affects the company a lot less than it impacts the farmers whose goods are sitting on the wharf, if they can even get into the wharf. We're hearing that roads are blocked so that the product can't even actually be sitting at the port. Of course, we've got growers who are trying to ship their product interstate, but we know that it's affecting all of the ports around the country. So this is just going to be a big waste of perishable goods that are, of course, is for economic growth for every Australian. And it also impacts, believe it or not, it does impact the cost of goods here in Australia, because you need those farmers to be viable, sustainable and profitable, because otherwise it starts having that impact on the domestic prices as well.
Yeah, just on that, I mean, if the farmer's got a contract to provide stuff to Japan, let's say perishable, strawberries, they can't get them out to the ports in Australia. They may not be able to sell them into the Australian market. What happens? Do you just leave them? You can't afford to pick them, I suppose, if you can't sell them, so they just rot in the paddock.
Well, it can either have the impact of rotting in the paddock or dropping the shelf price in Australia, which I appreciate is difficult because we have consumers right now who are crying out because of cost of living pressures. We do want to see that consumers can afford Australian produce. We're being told to get around the duopoly and that pressure, that power imbalance between the supermarkets and the farmers, that we should be opening up international trade. Well, it doesn't go so well to open up international trade where you can't actually get your product to that market, and it impacts our overseas customers as well. So we are literally being held to ransom, and we see this whenever we have union strikes where it incorporates perishable goods. They know that there is this finite amount of time that people have to get their product to market. So it's certainly something different, has a different impact than when we're just talking about widgets coming out of a widget factory.
Are you disappointed, Emma? We find out this week that the government's review into supermarket pricing, they looked at having a review last year, they knocked it back. They're now having a review led by Craig Emerson. I might remind people, he was the bloke when he was minister, who gave us Grocery Watch, which was ridiculous, and they scrapped it after a nanosecond. But we're having a review now. If they'd had the review 12 months ago, we'd be working on implementing whatever the review's going to tell us. But is a review what we need? Where do you sit on this issue of price gouging by supermarkets?
I think it's confusing to the general population because we've got multiple reviews happening at the same time. So there's a review into the Food and Grocery Code. There's the ACCC have been now called on to do a review of the pricing strategies and the way that there's the relationships happening between the chain and farmers particularly, but suppliers more generally. And then, of course, we've got the Senate review that was called for by the Greens, which is about price gouging. So all of a sudden you get this overlay of all these different reviews and we get to the point where we nearly can't see the forest for the trees. There's no question that having a system where we've only got two major supermarkets has an impact on both farmers who are trying to sell into those supermarkets and, of course, the consumers at the other end. We have to be thinking very meaningfully about what legislative frameworks exist, what things that the ACCC can be doing to govern those relationships a little bit better. Interestingly, the code review demonstrated that if you are a big supplier, so if you're a $250 million turnover business, you get along quite well with the supermarkets, and they were quite happy with the relationships with the supermarkets. It disproportionately impacts small family farmers who have got, once again, perishable goods. So the biggest ransom that farmers get held to is the fact that their products run out of shelf life and they've got a finite period of time to make a negotiation around price. And there's no question that the supermarkets know very well how to take advantage of that perishable nature of the goods that are in question.
Emma, just quickly, over summer I caught up with family on dairy farms and mates who run a sheep meat operation. They're all pretty cranky at the Bureau of Meteorology for forecasting that there'd be this terrible hot summer because they know people in their regions who sold their stock, often at rock-bottom prices, fearing they wouldn't have the stock feed around over summer. Of course, that's been the absolute opposite. What's been the reaction that members have fed into the VFF?
There is complete questioning around the accuracy of the Bureau of Meteorology's long-term forecasts. I think it's overlaid. It's not just about the forecast itself. A forecast is about a probability, but there was this hype that was generated via the media, via the Bureau and the commentary that was coming out from the Bureau that made farmers who have a very strong memory of what the last drought looked like. Farmers were often criticised for not destocking sooner. So we saw this big influx of livestock into the markets. Now, we talk about price gouging. This was a perfect opportunity for other supply chain members to price gouge on farmers. At the time where we saw the lowest livestock domestic prices, so on-farm prices, we were seeing exports that were actually, record levels of exports of our meat going out into different markets. So there's no question that farmers were losing value in that supply chain somewhere. And there's a lot of farmers that would be squarely laying some of that blame onto the Bureau of Meteorology. We actually have to look at whether or not our weather data and our predictions at the very least in keeping with some of best practice around the world. Is there an issue that we need to be looking at? Sometimes the forecast is wrong, but is there information or the communication coming out of the Bureau? Is there something that needs to be done to actually improve that? But of course, we don't actually talk about tangible measures ever. We just simply, headlines and sound bites. Let's not talk about actually fixing any problems or seeing if there's other solutions available to us, but certainly cost a lot of farmers a lot of money.